Good morning. My name is Dr. Kevin Ford, and I'm a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, the Gamma Pi chapter. And this
Good morning.
Dr. Kevin Ford. And this morning, we'll be discussing several topics for our health initiative, monthly health initiative. And today, we'll be discussing autism, spectrum disorder, and then also Alzheimer's. We have several great speakers today. The first speaker will be Dr. Miguel Reyes. And Dr. Reyes, he holds a PhD in family psychology and from Graduate School of Psychology, Pasadena, California. And his dissertation was a family development model for parenting children with autism. He also holds several master's degrees in theological studies, family therapy, and a master's of science in educational psychology and statistics. He is currently working with the Prince George's County Public School System as a school psychologist. And previous to that, from 2017 to 2021, he was the lead psychologist for the Maryland Department of Labor Adult Correctional Educational System. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Reyes to give us some words about autism.
Good morning, everyone. If you can give me a thumbs up in the chat room to let me know that you can hear me well, and that'll be helpful feedback. Appreciate that. Well, let me just say, this is a real pleasure for me to be here with all of you. I want to thank Dr. Ford and the rest of the team to allow me to do this brief presentation on autism. There's a lot to be said about autism. A lot of research, a lot of development, a lot of scientific research, quantitative and qualitative, is increasing exponentially, and there's so much to learn in terms of new knowledge and understanding and insight on the nature of autism, its impact, not only on the individual person that's experiencing it, but also those who are attempting or providing care, whether it's educational or parenting. But I think we're making some real strides in dealing with autism more effectively and working smarter with children who have autism. And I like to focus on parents. Parenting is the bedrock to shaping a child or a person who is experiencing autism. It is definitely the bedrock. The relationship that a caregiver parent has with a child, that context in and of itself is the structure or the fertile ground by which a child or a person's behavior can be shaped, that adaptive functioning can increase, that psychological and emotional well-being can increase. Also, quality of life. Quality of life is very important. However, there's a big risk that a lot of people are not too much aware of with those who are intimately involved in providing care to a person experiencing autism. I am a father of a child, a proud father of a child with autism. She's 21 years old. She's about to graduate from the Kennedy Krieger program in Baltimore. And 21 years of raising a child with autism has been one journey in and of itself. It's a narrative that I find that many people are not aware of. And it's an interesting experience to find oneself as a father amongst other parents, where the narrative I experience, the narrative I'm living, the narrative I share is not necessarily validated or understood by others. That's an interesting, that is a feeling that one is left with that is challenging, hard to make sense of, and it's a constant uphill battle to develop meaning in what you're doing as a father and to self-validate, basically, to continue making, how would I say, maintain that self-worth of what you're doing. And um, I would say that parents who are raising children with autism will experience higher levels of stress and poor physical health when compared to parents who are raising typical developmentally aged children. And the parenting stress experienced by those who raise children with autism appears to pose a greater risk to the parent's psychological and health related quality of life. That's been confirmed in research over and over and over again, both qualitatively and quantitatively. We all know that autism is a neurological disorder. It's characterized by social deficits of social interaction, communication skills, social emotional communication skills, both verbal and nonverbal, restricted interest, stereotypical behaviors, but also with mild to severe um, dysregulated behavior or dysregulated moods. Every child with autism will experience or exhibit some level of dysregulation or lack of self-control. There's no pretty picture involved here. Just you got to be very real about this. And many parents out there, if you're raising a child with autism, I'm sure that your child is either being behaviorally managed through ABA therapy or some kind of speech and language therapy, or even a combination of ABA and medical intervention. Um, and it's a real uphill challenge. And the symptoms with these children that we're raising, ranges from mild to severe, and it varies from individual to individual. That's why it's called a autism spectrum disorder. A child that's on the spectrum is unique. Not each child is the same. There may be overlapping characteristics, but each one is unique in and of herself or himself. And and the one who knows that uniqueness is the caregiver, the one that's there morning to evening, from the time they eat breakfast to the time they put them to bed, from the time they pick them up from school. They know him or her best. And they know what that unique is like. They know the personality of the child, his or her potential, and they're doing their best to teach and train to the potential, to water that seed so it can grow and flourish. And in the United States, there are a number of children identified with autism. It's increased from 1 in 150. So that's like 66.7 per 10,000 children. And it's growing. And it's growing because we're understanding what autism is, what ASD is about, and we're able to identify it better and catch it on time for early intervention, which is fundamental to shaping a child's behavior and help them increase their level of functioning. Now, there's something that parents are at risk of. Caregivers with children with autism are at risk of developing what is known as caregiver syndrome or caregiver stress. And it's a condition of exhaustion involving anger, rage, or guilt that results from unrelieved caring for a chronically, how would I say, that chronic dependency that the child has with the caregiver. Um, so there's that unrelieved stress where the caregiver finds him or herself constantly providing for the needs, the ADLs, the adaptive living needs of that child, and it's chronic, it's ongoing. And there are moments where there's some relief because the child may display some independency and all of a sudden gets dysregulated and goes back to depending more on the child, on the caregiver. And it's a caregiver burnout. It's a caregiver burden. Okay. Um, and it's described as physical, emotional, mental exhaustion. It's also accompanied by change in attitude from positive and caring to negative and unconcerned as a consequences of tending to ongoing demands that are inherent in caring for a dependent individual. And that is a major part of the narrative that caregivers have, and and they seek to be validated, and it's hard to experience that validation. But research shows that, and I can also verify this personally from my personal narrative, that it's important. There's some interventions, 3 interventions that are very effective, and I think our government, our state government, I think providers at the state level, and even at the educational level, educational institutions and schools need to be more aware of this, and um, uh, be more intentional in providing these type of supports. One of them is social support, like an informal network. Um, uh, Also, reduced isolation, getting involved with other parents, getting out of the house more with other parents who are going through the same journey, and also other parents that are raising typical children as well. Um, so informal networks are very, very effective to be involved in. Skill development, um, being able to accept the reality of what they're going through, putting aside or adjusting those unreasonable beliefs. Every parent that starts off with a child with autism uh, has a belief, has that faith that yes, that child will come close to being a typical developmentally aged child. But as time goes on, especially when the child is at that transitioning phase, about to graduate from school, um, that they may see that yes, that child didn't meet that expectation of normalcy that they expected early on when the child was just an infant or in elementary school. And that's a loss. That's a loss they begin to experience. It's hard to wrestle with, and but acceptance of what they're going through is key to mental health. It's also helpful for stress management. Skills in problem solving is very important, especially when parents have to deal with IEP meetings and IEP committees, because they may not know how to articulate or speak intelligently about the goals and objectives, and making sure that the assessment results, the data in speech and language, the psychoeducational data are informing, or that the goals and objectives are informed by the findings, the assessment's findings, and that there are some real evidence-based effective interventions and supports and conditions in place to facilitate increase the chances that the child will achieve those developmental goals, whether it's in social communication, not only just academic, but also in self-regulation. Every IEP for a child with autism ought to have a self-regulation goal, and also a goal for emotional intelligence. And that's a topic I'm going to be speaking about at another event in May 10th. Children with autism are probably the most emotionally intelligent children on earth. And a lot of people don't realize this, but they're emotionally intelligent in their own way. And they're creative in their own way, but we tend to miss it. And children with autism tend not to feel validated for that creativity, that intelligence they have that's at a higher level, but in a different way. And the reason for that is because we don't operate out of a paradigm or construct to detect that emotional intelligence that is being expressed uniquely by the child with autism. We operate out of a different construct because we still have to advance in theory and also in science to come up with those lenses by which to better interpret what the child is presenting and understand what their own personal narrative is. And also gaining knowledge is key for not being succumbed by the caregiver syndrome. And like now, if there's any parents out there, you feel free to ask any questions. But gaining knowledge, resources, services, oh, there are plenty of services and knowledge out there, and resources that caregivers are not necessarily aware of. You can't depend on the educational institutions to provide that. It's networks just like this right here that can truly make a difference. So I'm really pleased to see that this is going on, that we have this network here that's allowing this discussion on autism. And although it's informal for parents, but it's keeping it simple, doable, practical, sharing that pragmatic understanding of how to deal with children with autism, and also beginning to shape our understanding. Parents, is very, very important that we adjust our belief systems with both facts, truth, knowledge, um, um, about our children, about the kids we're trying to raise, or adults with autism, um, to help us work smarter, not harder. And there's a whole big discussion on that in and of itself. I don't want to talk much. I would like to interact more. So that's my presentation. So are there any questions out there?
Well, a couple questions. You mentioned a couple different things, Dr. Reyes. One big thing, you're talking about burnout for caregivers, and
Yes.
how do you deal with that, or talk to people about what they should do? Are there any people that come in and help give like respite care, kind of to help with the child while they get away for a while, or can you expand on that?
Sure, sure. Yeah, on the social level, respite care is an opportunity to take that break from that cycle of where you find yourself just caring over and over again for a child that depends on you. What's interesting though, over time, parents are, since they're stuck in that mode of just providing care, and not experiencing so much social time or leisure time with their partner, because they're stuck in that mode of providing care. So when they do come, when the opportunity for respite arrives, they'll go out and they kind of feel awkward. They'll have a sense like, okay, what do we do? It's like, that whole experience, that whole to just lay back, enjoy. And it's hard to enjoy because in the back of their mind, they're wondering, okay, how's Johnny doing? How's Dante doing at home? I mean, is he doing okay? Is he any problem behavior? So, they find themselves texting back to the caregiver, everything okay, checking in. And I remember I experienced the moment I had to go to Puerto Rico for a week to do a speaking engagement. And I left and my mind was at home while my body was in Puerto Rico.
Mhm.
And I was constantly contacting my wife saying, okay, everything okay, et cetera, et cetera. And I had a friend of mine that in Puerto Rico said, listen, you're going to have to just take that leap of faith and forget about what's going on at home. My wife pretty much reiterated reinforced that same message. And you got to let it go. You got to let it go. And it's hard to, but it all starts with your belief system. It really is. There's a cognitive, I call it a cognitive behavioral aspect to for caregivers that come out of that, not be succumbed by that syndrome, that caregiver burnout, and that is to come up with some reasonable beliefs, okay, about your child, about how they're going to develop. You're not going to have the typical child. You got to let go of that. The child will never be typical in comparison to his same age peers. He's going to be below in terms of social interaction, social communication, self-regulation, in relation to his same age peers. Now, there are parents who have children that are very well below, or slightly below, or moderately below. There's different levels of not being up to par with children of same age peers. And those varying levels will determine how much support respite care that they deserve, so they can have more leisure time, and also determines how intense that parenting experience is. And but one thing you got to keep in mind, that regardless of what your child looks like, you have to understand that all the characteristics that a child presents, a child with autism or an adult presents with, it's noisy. It's like, I take this $20 bill. How many of you would like this $20 bill? You want to give me a thumbs up in the chat room? Dr. Ford, you want it, right? I'll give it to you.
Sir.
I'm going to crumple it up. You still want it?
Yes, $20.
Okay, you still want it. I could dip it in my coffee mug and dirty it all up. And I said, do you still want it?
Probably not.
Probably not. It's the $20 bill.
Right.
It's still a $25 bill. No matter what it looks like, the value never changes.
Right.
You see, no matter what it looks like. And that's what happens with children with autism. They're presenting all these behaviors, and it becomes unpredictable at times. And there's so much noise there, and it's easy just to focus on all the noise and the wrinkles and the distortions. But you got to keep in mind that the value never changes. That's what we call self-worth, and also maintaining that your child is worthy and deserves the best. Okay, so that inherent value never changes, and that is a helpful thought to maintain, and it really helps in facilitating the parent's adaptation, that oomph to keep on pushing on and not giving up.
Right, right. Also, you had mentioned it was important for parents to connect. Are there any societies that you feel are great for parents who have children with on the autism spectrum?
Well, I tell you, there's a lot of I think the most effective way of going about not becoming succumbed by this burnout is to connect with other parents who are raising children with autism. So if you are have your child in school, for example, at the Kennedy Krieger School, all the parents there have a child with autism, obviously, and we do our best to connect with them. And it feels really good that you're working with a parent who is also a professional, and has given up their career to some degree in order to raise your child, given the demands, and you're able to talk the same language. And it's an automatic validation. Both of you are in the same journey. It feels good. So at a school, if you don't have a child in a specialized school, there are parents still there that have children with autism. And it's important to ask the school counselor, ask the school psychologist, ask the principal if there are resources. Contacting the ARC of Baltimore, the ARC of in Maryland, the different ARC centers. They have support groups for fathers. They have support groups for mothers. They have support groups for families where you can gather each month. They have events, and you need to connect with them. You got to get out of your bubble and go out and connect with them outside. So that connecting with that informal network of other people who are going through a similar journey is key. That's one of the major interventions that do make a difference for caregivers. And skill development, learn how to accept what you're going through, and stress management. Even though you may not be able to experience much leisure, but you might be able to experience it at the home itself. For example, exercise, spending quality time with your partner, your co-caregiver that's helping you raise your child. Also playing games, doing different things with the child, so that you're not just focusing on caregiving, but doing something together. There's simple things that a child will like, for example, car rides. You may not be able to go to the parks that often because the child may not be able to tolerate all the stimulation that surrounds him or her at an amusement park. But there are things you can do that the child may experience, like picnics in quiet areas that the child may appreciate. And so you got to find that niche, find those particulars, those specific types of activities that will give you an outlet to experience some leisure time. Creativity, you're gonna have to be creative. And another intervention, like I mentioned previously, is gaining knowledge. Knowledge is powerful. Surround yourself with people who know about autism, people who are also experiencing that caregiving experience, and they understand what burnt out is and what they're doing to overcome it and to be successful in life. Surround yourself with those knowledgeable, successful parents that are also caregivers and are making it and doing very well. That's key. They will serve as models, believe me. And there's no shame in tapping into them and say, hey, what do you think about this? Can you give me any input, any advice? And sharing with them what you're going through. There's no shame. You're going to have to put that shame aside. And that's part of the acceptance process. Just accept it, put that shame aside. I still do it. I contact people in California. I contact people in Florida. I contact, and it's amazing. I had a clinical supervisor, I was talking to him like maybe back in August, and he has a child that was born with autism. And he's the director of the Autism Center at the Florida Institute of Technology, where I did my postdoctorate, and he was my supervisor. And he runs an autism center clinic. And he says, this is tough. This is tough. So here you go. He shifted from being a clinical provider to children with ABA services for children with autism. And now he's on the other side of the fence as a father. And he's like, dear Lord, this is tough. And now he understands. So now he has to integrate that narrative with his career. And it's really shaped and impacted how he practices. And it feels good to know a fellow practitioner that resembles or reflects what you're going through. It really does.
Okay. So one of the last question here, health insurance for children with autism. I think there was some issues of whether after they've gone out of, after they're 21 and a lot of them may not be working, is it hard for them as far as healthcare, getting healthcare? Have you heard of that before? That was one of the questions that we
had. Health insurance.
Health coverage, because I think I was reading something about how a lot of children who have autism, as they move on in life after 21, right, then will they still be covered under their parents' insurance? Because a lot of them may not. It's like a gap in care for those particular individuals. So I don't know if you know anything about that. That was one of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, when automatically a child that reaches adult age, they are eligible for SSI.
Okay.
Yeah, Medicare. And that covers their medical needs, all the health coverage they need automatically.
Okay.
Yeah, at least in the state of Maryland, that's how it is. So once that child hits 18, they automatically, or it might be even less. But if you have the one that would have that knowledge would be the school district would know that, because they do bill SSI for specific services, like in speech and language. So if you have a counselor at the school, they would have some knowledge or resources on that. Yes, automatically that benefit kicks in, and it's a helpful resource to make for coverage for all types of services. And then when the child goes through transition, say at age 14 in the state of Maryland, your child, the IEP team, the individualized educational plan, program, the team that manages that ought to be discussing transition already. Transition. What is that child going to do beyond high school? Okay, right. when they exit the IEP and move on after postgraduate experience, are they going to get services in the community? Is it going to be community based, or is it going to be home based? Those are two options, and that's where Open Doors program gets involved. Highly resourceful organization for ensuring that those supports are in place, and also the DDA. The DDA. I don't know the exact name for that acronym, but they work with adults with disability, and they set up a whole support program based on what your child's particular profile is in terms of their needs for support. And so it's important that that discussion at the IEP table begins at 14, so that by the time they hit 20 in their last year of schooling, they already start formulating a plan, and that the DDA is involved in those IEP meetings. That is key, because that's a journey in and of itself. A lot of paperwork, that is stressful as well. And it's best to connect with other parents that have gone through it, because they can give you insight as to what to do, what not to do. Yeah, so that's very key, because it's beyond, once the student is out of school, you have that child in your house 24/7, you see, and you're going to need those supports in place.
Sounds good. Well, I thank you very much, Dr. Reyes, on your presentation and answering some questions on autism spectrum disorder. And we're going to transition at this point to Alzheimer's, which is a form of dementia. And I'm going to introduce to you Ms. Karen Fagan, and she's program manager for the Alzheimer's Association. And I'm going to have her to introduce our speaker at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Ford. Dr. Reyes, that was a wonderful presentation. Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Karen Fagan. I am a program manager with the Alzheimer's Association. Today, our speaker is Robert Dantzler. He will be talking with you today a little bit about what is Alzheimer's disease and the 10 warning signs. Just briefly, Mr. Dantzler is an alumnus of Claflin University, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts in American Studies, and from South Carolina State University with a master's in English education. He's currently an adjunct professor at the University of the District of Columbia, where he teaches interdisciplinary studies. Mr. Dantzler's work and connection to Alzheimer's disease is through as a primary caregiver for his grandmother, as well as a family caregiver for his maternal grandfather, who were both diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He is a trained community educator with the association, and he will also soon be one of our co-facilitators for a all-male caregiver support group, which we will be launching in the very near future. I'm going to be running the slides today for Mr. Dantzler, so thank you very much for
Okay, good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm having a little bit of connectivity. I'm having some sudden connectivity issues on my end. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good, thank you. So I want to say thank you to Karen and the Alzheimer's Association for this opportunity, as well as to the men of Omega Psi-Phi. And as Karen stated, we will be talking about the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's disease. And like with Dr. Reyes just now, I'll be sharing some of my personal story, having been a caregiver for my grandmother, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and my grandfather, but more so my grandmother. So I'll be giving some examples as we go along in the show, or in the presentation, so to speak. So what we're looking at right now are the learning objectives for today. And now, while these are for this particular presentation and sharing, these are also some things that can actually be applicable to our daily lives. So first, we want to describe the typical age-related memory, thinking, and behavior changes, recognize common warning signs of Alzheimer's and dementia, discuss the tips for approaching someone about memory concerns, explain the experience of early detection and benefits of diagnosis, identify possible tests and assessments for diagnostic process, and name the resources available through the Alzheimer's Association. Next slide, please. So in the interest of time, we're going to skip through this part, but what this was, it was about a family whose mother was beginning to experience some of these signs. But again, for the interest of time, we're going to jump right into these and kind of like we can, as we go through, we'll be able to fill in those blanks. So the first step, or the early warning sign of Alzheimer's disease, is memory loss that disrupts daily life. And so one of the most common signs of Alzheimer's is forgetting recently learned information, forgetting important dates or events, asking someone questions over and over, increasingly reliant on memory aids such as sticky notes, or even sometimes, if someone is still tech savvy, maybe some phone notifications or anything, or a family member, relying on a family member for these tasks for smaller things. And what's typically age-related, the typical age-related change is that forgetting names or appointments, but remembering them later. Now, this is a little bit different. It's not the same as say, okay, what was I doing? I just forgot this, where sometimes, on a daily basis, we forget things here and there. But we're talking about when it's a common occurrence of important things that, like someone may be forgetting to go to work or something like that, or things like that. Those very important things, forgetting a doctor's appointment, forgetting a birthday and things like that. And again, there are some things that just kind of just slip our minds, but we're not really talking about this. It's just like when it starts to interrupt or disrupt the daily life, that's a sign that it's time to key in. Okay, next sign, please. So the second sign is that there are challenges in planning or solving problems. So what are the possible signs of someone who may have been diagnosed with dementia is that some people may experience changes in their ability to develop and follow a plan or work with numbers, which may result in trouble following a familiar recipe or keeping track of monthly bills, difficulty concentrating, and taking much longer to complete tasks. And what is typical for age-related change is that making occasional errors when managing finances or household bills. Okay, so my grandmother was one who was always on top of everything. She was always, she kept her checkbook balance. And I know a lot of people don't write checks anymore, but she kept her checkbook balance. She kept her bills up to date. But then when he started noticing that, wait a minute, we're getting some late notices and now we're getting some late fees. And so even a point where her phone bill, which was typically say $75 a month, was now $400 because again, those interruptions in daily life, as well as being able to keep track of those things. And it was kind of like getting away from her. So it's like, okay, now it's time to zero in a little bit more on this. And you hear me say that quite often about it's time to zero in on these things. Okay. Next sign, please. So also what you may see or experience is the difficulty with completing familiar tasks. So people living with dementia commonly have difficulty completing daily tasks, such as driving to a familiar location, organizing a grocery list, remember the rules of a favorite game. And what's typical for age-related change is that occasionally needing help to use the settings on a microwave or record a television show. So again, when we start to see these changes, when someone normally has something that they normally do with ease, and now they're starting to start struggling, and it could be something as simple as just like sending an email or organize very simple tasks, and they start to find a challenge in it. That may be a time to, hey, is something going on here? I remember a story. This wasn't a personal story of mine, but I remember a friend telling me about his grandfather would sometimes drive to another location and then forget how I got there. And it's something else that we're going to talk about in another sign as well. But there are times where, say you have a normal routine of drives to one place or you visit one place, and then suddenly there's like just a lot of confusion. The comprehension is off or the cognition is off. And then again, that's the time to zero in and find out like what may be happening. Okay, next sign. All right, fourth is confusion with time or place. So what is a possible sign of dementia regarding this sign is that people with Alzheimer's or other dementias lose track of dates, seasons, and passage of time. They may have trouble understanding something if it is not happening immediately, and they may forget where they are and how they got there. And what's typical to age-related change is getting confused about the day of the week, but figuring it out later. So what was personal for me here, there are two examples that come to mind. There was one when there was my doctor, not my doctor, my grandmother's doctor was noticing that, okay, you know, Ms. Dantzler's not, you know, remembering things or recalling things. So I'm going to give her a test for Alzheimer's. And so when he gave her a test, he asked her, like, what year is it? Do you know what year it is? And she said, yes. And he said, well, what year is it? She said, it's 1998, but the year was actually 2006. And so it's almost like, okay, I have an idea of what it is, but then she says something, but okay, you see, at that time, she was totally like a number of years off. And then also when he talks also about they may forget where they are or how they got there. So at a certain point, my grandmother used to love being at home because it was a very safe place. And then I had family members like, you know, grandma, you need to get out the house. Mama, you need to get out the house. And, you know, she would like, no, I just want to stay home. But then when she would go out, you know, there would be times where she would just, it was almost like a switch would get clicked somehow and she would just forget where she was. And then she was like, when did we get here? Or how did we get here? You know, or like, whose house are we at? And I was like, you know, well, we're over at, you know, our cousin's house. And she was like, when did we get here? And so when these things start happening, it's maybe a time to, like, again, zero in to find out what may be happening with our loved ones. Okay, next sign. All right, the fifth one is trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. Okay, so for some reason, people having vision problems is a sign of dementia, which may lead to this. Difficulty with balance, trouble reading, and problems judging distance and determining color and contrast, which may cause issues with driving, and what is associated with age-related change or vision changes related to cataracts. So my grandmother actually had cataracts, but it was something that was actually contributed to her age or maybe genetics, and at that time, it was not anything that was made in connection with dementia. So, but however, in regards to the sign, what we may see is like, so, you know, in the DMV area, especially in Washington, D.C., there are, some of these roads are very compact. And so what you may see is like someone may be driving down the street and where you may have, it's just like a two-way street, but, you know, you have those cars that are kind of like parked on the side and, you know, everybody just kind of goes through. It's okay. We know that it's narrow, but a person who may be having a spatial issue will be a person who may actually stop because they can't tell how far the, you know, apart the cars are. And, you know, we've seen instances where people have hit a car, a parked car, or hit a car that was oncoming because they were not able to determine or predict the amount of space that they had between the cars, whether parked or moving. And so that's something to, again, zero in on when people are having those issues. And it's not just because, you know, sometimes you may think that somebody's having trouble because they don't know the size of their car, but, you know, this, you know, especially a time to zero in is when we see folks who have been driving their car for like 10 years or more. And so that's a time, there's a possible sign of having a spatial issue that may be related to dementia. All right, next slide. Okay, so new problems with words in speaking or writing. So people living with Alzheimer's have trouble following or joining a conversation. They may stop in the middle of a conversation and have no idea how to continue. They may repeat themselves, struggle with vocabulary, or have trouble naming a familiar object or use the wrong name. So what is typical for age-related change is sometimes having trouble finding the right word. So now I know we have our moments, so don't be alarmed if you find out, like, say, because some of us at just any given moment, we may get stuck in a conversation, we may fumble for a word. to find, we can say, oh, what's the right word I want to use? But again, when this is something that is commonly happening, or when someone repeats themselves, something that was very common with my grandmother, she would repeat something like almost every 5 minutes, as we started to notice that she had Alzheimer's. Every 5 minutes, she would be saying the same thing. And, sometimes I'll be like, Grandma, you already told me that. And she's like, I did. And then again, 5 minutes later, telling me that same thing. And again, when they get like stuck really in the middle of a thought and can't pick up, because and again, this is different from like when we're having conversation and we start talking, or we're speaking to someone, and we know someone may ask a question and it may take us, we may go off on a tangent somewhere else, but we're able to pick back up. With a person who has dementia, this likely does not happen. They just really get stuck and unable to like recover in that conversation. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. So a person with Alzheimer's may put things in unusual places. He or she may lose things and be unable to go back over these steps to find them. Accuse others of stealing, which may occur frequently over time. And what's typical of age-related change is that misplacing things from time to time and retracing steps to find them. So what this looks like is, say we get home, we go inside, we put something down, and then maybe an hour later we're looking for it, we can't find it. So what's typical? We trace our steps. Well, with a person with dementia, they're not able to do that. Clearly they can't do that because they just, the cognition is off, the comprehension is off, and they're not able to do this. I saw this quite frequently with my grandmother, where, and even there were times where I got accused of stealing, or moving something. She was asked like, Robert, where did you put this? And I'm like, Grandma, I didn't move that. I didn't see it. And she's like, you did. You had to move it because it's only us here in this house. And I'm like, okay, Grandma, that wasn't me. And then even to the point where she would start to misplace things like her actual bills, which relates to keeping track, because sometimes she would inadvertently throw a bill in the trash, because sometimes she was like, okay, I need to put this up for safekeeping. And then she would inadvertently put it in the trash can, as opposed to putting it in like a file or something, a folder or something like that, or wherever she used to keep them. And then also what we would see is that I would see, like, I would go to the refrigerator, I'm going to get me a drink of water, some juice or whatever, and I see laundry detergent in the refrigerator, or I would see dish detergent in the refrigerator. And, in those moments, you kind of like, Grandma, why did you do this? But then she would, of course, say, I didn't do that. You just kind of have to like, just move it to its rightful place and just continue on. But something like that. It's not just normal, okay, I just forgot where I put this and you're able to track it later. Folks with Alzheimer's, unable to do that. All right, next slide. All right, so there's a decreased or poor judgment. So people living with Alzheimer's may experience changes in judgment or decision-making. They may use poor judgment when dealing with money, pay less attention to grooming or keeping themselves clean, or they may make bad decisions or mistake, or what's typical for age-related change, making a bad decision or mistake once in a while, like neglecting to change the oil in the car. Okay, so what this looked like in my life with my grandmother was that, like I said before, she not only would she sometimes forget to pay her bills or send the checks off, sometimes she would write the checks incorrectly. And, we'll have to just kind of like trace back. I'm like, okay, you're getting forgetful, but it was actually early stages of Alzheimer's. Or what you might see, and my grandmother was a very clean person, very clean. So far as keeping her body bathed, keeping her house clean, she was, that was grandma. As a matter of fact, she was a housekeeper. That was her profession. Growing up in, the 40s and living in the 50s and raising her children, she was a housekeeper, and she worked in different cities. Keeping the house clean, that's what she did. But when she started to do that, make those errors, that's when, again, time to zero in. And something else that we also want to pay attention to is that there are scammers out here who actually prey on elderly folks because they often have poor judgment when dealing with money, or sometimes even, you see folks with Alzheimer's, they may pay a bill repeatedly because they may not have remembered that they paid it before. So some kind of the typical actions that we see with this particular sign. Next sign, please. All right, this one is withdrawal from work or social activities. So a person living with dementia may experience changes in the ability to hold or follow a conversation. As a result, he or she may withdraw from hobbies, social activities, or other engagements and have trouble keeping up with a favorite team or activity. And it was typical for age-related change is sometimes feeling uninterested in family or social engagements. So as I mentioned before, what was typical or what I saw a lot with my grandmother was that either she would like to stay at home because she didn't like going out because she felt safe at home. Or if she went out, the question was, what time are we going home? When are we going home? We may be there for a half hour, an hour, and the intention may be, we're going to be over at this family's house for dinner for about 4 hours or so, and maybe an hour, if that long. She's like, what time are we going to go home? And then she may start to get antsy because, again, it's an unfamiliar setting and they want to be in the places where they feel they are comfortable. All right. Next sign, please. Changes in mood and personality. So people living with dementia may experience mood or personality changes, such as becoming confused, suspicious, depressed, fearful, or anxious, getting easily upset at home with friends or when out of their comfort zone. And what is typical for age-related change is that developing very specific ways of doing things and becoming irritable when a routine is disrupted. And so again, I saw this with my grandmother when she would get to the point of getting upset. My grandmother was one that we would say that was very diplomatic. It took a lot to really make her upset or, get her out of her zone, so to speak. But when we started to see, she became, again, easily agitated. She would get upset with things, especially if you weren't communicating in a way that she felt was clear. That's when, again, she got suspicious of things. When we talk about the misplacing thing, she used to say, where did you put this? And I'm like, I didn't move that. But, she became very suspicious of different people's motives and whatnot. And so something to, again, zero in on. And then ultimately she became physical when she got further advanced, where, she started hitting like her sitters and stuff. And, my grandma, and, of course I experienced my grandma discipline me when I was a kid. But, at a certain age, you didn't see that side of her. But as it advanced, she became very physical, and even to the point where, I've seen her slap people in the face or, hit somebody with a closed fist. Okay. And those are our 10 signs. And so what we're moving to next, so the 10 steps to approach memory concerns. Okay, so that once you start to recognize these signs, these are some steps that you might want to look into, or that the Alzheimer's Association actually recommends that you begin looking into as you start to see these. So first, what changes in memory or thinking or behavior do you see? Next thing is, what else is going on? So with these things, you want to start to make all the notes, whether you're making mental notes or you're making written notes or you're typing notes, whatever it is, you want to start making these different notes about what you are seeing and what you are observing. Okay. You want to learn about the signs and the benefits of early diagnosis. You want to also ask has anyone else noticed the changes? What I would insert here is that, so at first, I was not able to recognize a lot of things because I was very close to my grandmother. And so it's just something about when we're close to people, we don't always see the changes. But there was a neighbor who noticed something, and that neighbor brought it to my attention. Or there was another neighbor who I spoke to, and she was like, yeah, I've been noticed that with your grandmother, but she I didn't want to say anything. So, compare notes. What else have other people noticed? Then you want to start to have a conversation. And with that conversation, you want to discuss, who should, who should have the conversation to discuss the concerns, who are going to be a part of what we call a care team, who's going to be involved with the caregiving for the person with Alzheimer's. You want to also ask the question like, what is the best time and place to have the conversation? Because you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, everybody's on one accord. You want to ask also, what will you or the person having the conversation say? How are you going to approach it? What things will you bring up? you want to offer to go with the person to the doctor. And this is important because there are folks who are, what you'll find out with Alzheimer's, there is often a lot of denial, and folks will not want to go to the doctor for this particular reason. So you may say, hey, let's go to the doctor together. I'll go with you. And then even like think about turning it into like a fun date or something where, like, okay, now that we go to the doctor, let's go out and have some lunch or whatever. Let's go walk in the park. Let's do something fun, something that they can connect to. And if needed, have multiple conversations, because everything may not be able to be conquered at the same time. And then ultimately, of course, you want to turn to the Alzheimer's Association for support and information. And most importantly, see a doctor for a proper diagnosis. Okay.
All right. Wow, that's a lot of important information in there
Yes, sir.
that you presented today. And I think some of the things is one that I think that was important was it's a group effort, whoever's around, your grandmother, the neighbor, other siblings, aunts, uncles, to get together and talk about it, because that will help with early diagnosis.
Absolutely.
And another important thing, I think you mentioned about possibly they're in denial a lot of times, but
yes,
as a physician, have someone come into the office with that person, because you're going to hear, as a physician, you're going to hear a whole nother story from the actual caregiver or relative. And so I think that is definitely important. And in that way, you can make sure that we're screening them. All those things you talked about, she didn't know the year, maybe where she was. All of those things we go through what's called a mini mental status exam.
yes.
And that's one of the ways we can help to initially diagnose someone with a form of dementia, which is or Alzheimer's.
Yeah. And if I could add one thing to this, Dr. Ford, the part about the denial is that often a person who is in the early stages of Alzheimer's, they will play things down. So for instance, my grandmother was forgetting something. She would laugh a lot of things. She's like, oh, I knew that. When you would actually say something, she was like, yeah, I knew that, as if, she was just always there. And so when she would do that, of course, that would throw me off, because I'm like, oh, grandma, I just forgot. But then when it became a repeated thing, that's when, again, you have another perspective from, say, like a neighbor or a relative who is not around her as often, or your actual physician who will be like, hey, I think, your grandmother is at early spot of, at an early age of dementia, Alzheimer's type.
Mm-hmm.
I just saw a question come into the chat. What was that question?
What's the average age of onset?
Okay, so I believe that persons, and Karen can correct me if I'm off on this, but typically it's like if it's somebody before 60 is when that's considered early onset, before the age of 60.
Yes, that's correct. Before the age of 60, you would consider it early onset. However, the highest risk factor for the development of dementia is age. It's very unusual, not very unusual, but it's more rare that you would see someone diagnosed with younger onset.
So I think the earliest age I heard was 45, but again, don't be alarmed, because again, we live in a world where there are a lot of things going on, a lot of different stressors. It doesn't mean we have Alzheimer's. Sometimes it just means we just need to take some more rest.
Right. So yeah, definitely. The other thing, I think what's important, once we realize that someone has dementia, Alzheimer's, is to start getting things like healthcare proxies, advanced directives, all of those things in order when they're early on. Because just like I think someone in the chat wrote about how they get taken advantage of, or you mentioned it also, get taken advantage of. And so you can kind of hopefully help to go and monitor what they're doing with their bills or their bank account. You know, they get multiple calls. If anyone's ever been home during the day, you know how often that phone rings, someone calling, and then some of these people are scammers.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, you can have at least access to know what they're doing as far as their bills are concerned. And also from the medical point of view, also helping them to make decisions about anything that goes on, you know, as far as their health is concerned. So I think that's something to look at even early on when someone has Alzheimer's.
Yes. And I also saw a question, or do we have time to respond to the question about can anything be done to delay the onset?
Sure.
Okay, so what a lot of aging services and aging councils, what they're recommending are just at best the preventative measures. And what the preventative measures are is just like saying, you know, being mindful of your diet, definitely taking care of things like your kidneys and your blood pressure, because those have also been shown things to kind of trigger the onset of Alzheimer's. Healthy lifestyles, like, you know, again, your diet, exercise, reading, doing things like the puzzles and things like that, things that actually challenge the mind, things like that, you know, staying as stress-free as possible, meditation, if that's a part of anyone's particular, say, core belief set or anything like that, like religion or spirituality, things like that will help, you know, like say delay the onset or it absolutely prevent it from happening.
Right. Well, I think we've come upon that 11 o'clock hour. I think we packed in a lot of information today for our viewing audience about autism spectrum disorder, Alzheimer's disease, and just wanted to thank Dr. Reyes and thank Mr. Dantzler and Ms. Fagan for coming on and sharing the information. I think we'll also have another presentation in June for Alzheimer's, so we're looking forward to that. But definitely, I want to thank everyone on behalf of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, Gamma Pi Chapter, the Health Initiative Committee for viewing and also the support we're getting. I appreciate everyone coming on and thank you.
Thank you.
All
Goodbye,
right.
everyone.
Thank you as well.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
All right.